Your computer is nothing without the motherboard. It carries both power and This was but a small taste of what's out there, guys. We had at least 3 more that we wanted to get in for this video that just never arrived, like this X79 motherboard, this X79 motherboard,
this X79 motherboard.
Hello, welcome back to this channel. Since this idea actually comes from an English-speaking creator, I guess I will try to cater to the English-speaking watchers and actually speak in English on this video, and also because it's a little fun to change things up. Okay, in this video we'll discuss about the Chinese X79 ITX. It comes with different brands. You might find one under Atermeter, Alzenit, or any other brand. It usually comes with
75-day money-back guarantee.
But good luck trying to claim that. Anyway, we'll divide the review of this motherboard into 3 chapters. First will be the in-depth analysis of the motherboard itself. The second will be the analysis of the X79 or LGA 2011 platform. And the third, as the end chapter of any video, will be the conclusion. Stick around and you might learn a really important information. On to the first chapter. As the title of the chapter suggests, we'll take a closer look to the motherboard. First, we will take a look on the ports or something you can plug into the motherboard. First is LGA 2011 socket itself, one 4-pin PWM fan header, one 3-pin fan header, one USB 2.0 header, one USB 3.0 header that actually runs at USB 2.0, 4 SATA 2 ports, no SATA 3 in this motherboard, although there is a version which supply 1 SATA 3 ports, 1 audio header, 1 PCIe 3.0 X4 port that actually runs at 3.0 depending on your processor, or can also be used for SATA SSD, so it can be used for SATA SSD or NVMe SSD, and 1 PCIe 3.0 X16 port, and a front panel header. Now we can take a look on the back port of this motherboard. 1 PS2 separate keyboard and mouse port, 6 USB 2.0 port, 1 gigabit Ethernet, and audio port. Now we can actually take a look at the actual component of this motherboard. On the VRM side, it runs on 4+1 design with MOSFET KN 3103 and KN 3107 with maximum output of 60 amp. Now at CPU voltage of 3.3 volt, it can supply the peak maximum of about 200 watt, while continuous maximum at about 40 amp, which means it can continuously supply 132 watts, while the high-end CPU of this socket is running at 130 watt. It's actually really cutting it close to the TDP. Okay, to the next component, chokes. It writes R80, but there's not actually a searchable specification for it, so we're just gonna pass right through to the capacitor, written as C19D and C17D, which actually land us in the same situation with the lack of documentation. But I think we can assume that it will actually be a run-of-the-mill, cheapest of the bunch, barely passing the requirement to boot the CPU, the same as the MOSFETs integrated in this kind of motherboards. Next, we will analyze the chipsets that being used in this motherboard. There's 3 chipsets that we will be looking at. The motherboard chipset, or can be called North Bridge, the network chipset, and the audio chipset. On the motherboard chipset, you can already see where they cut another corner. On this quote-unquote X79 motherboard, it's actually running on the C202 chipset, which actually intended for the Sandy Bridge LGA 1155 Xeons. For your information, the right chipset for this motherboard is either X79, C600, or C602. The next one we'll be looking at is the audio chipset, which is the Realtek ALC662, which is the low-end 5.1 channel audio by Realtek. You might realize something odd around the chipset itself. We can actually see the absence of capacitors that usually surround the chipset itself to supply it with clean electricity path with no disturbance. The network chipset is the RTL 8111 Gigabit Ethernet by Realtek, which gets the job done. To summarize the ports and components of this motherboard, bad MOSFET, which in turn bad VRM, only SATA 2 and USB 2. Even on the USB 3 header, it actually ran on USB 2. The North Bridge or motherboard chipset is actually running a modified Sandy Bridge chipset, no capacitor for the audio chipset, and it's actually not ITX. It's actually a DTX motherboard with the PCIe port on the second slot, not on the first, with the dimension of the motherboard around 17 by 19 cm, not 17 by 17 cm. Now we can actually look at the platform itself on whether the Xeon V1 or V2 is actually worth it to be used on your computer. We will be looking at two use cases for this CPU. For gaming because of its lower price, and for workstation because of its high core count, ECC support, and for its cheap RAM. On the first case, you might think it will be a blowout against this newer modern CPU, which is actually not the case. Against the Ryzen 3rd Gen 3700X, this generations of CPU actually put up a pretty good fight and shows that it can actually be used as a budget gaming CPU, paired with a budget GPU like the 1660 Super or RTX 2060 or equivalent GPU performance. On these days though, this GPU cannot be called as a budget option, but we have to wait and see if GPU prices improves in 2022 and hope that these GPU prices will come back to normal. And with the future of gaming actually focusing on high core count, this could breathe a new life to these old CPUs. On the second case, you actually have a pretty good budget option that can produce quite a good result for productivity, but only on the highest SKUs of these processors, either the E5-2697 V2 or E5-2690 V2, while the lower end model will get you into struggle town and never let you out. So where does this Xeon CPUs actually coming from, and what happened with it? It actually comes from server farms. On we go to the last chapter. So how did the X79 platform as a whole perform? It actually performed admirably if you set the expectation correct. If you just see the core count and expect it to perform as well as its modern day counterpart, you're gonna have a bad time. But if you truly understand that even the highest end of the X79 lineup is actually performing close to the middle of the pack processors in 2021, you have a good budget options for gaming and workstation build. But who actually is this built for? Because you already know that it doesn't have an upgrade path on the platform. I think the only logical option for this processor line is for the people who are actually still using the X79 system, not a newcomer looking to make a new build. As for the motherboard itself, or someone actually using it for a new build, there's actually only one reason you would want to go for the X79 platform. Big, enormous, gigantic RAM capacity utilizing the used RDIMM being thrown out by the server farms. Now, I don't know why you would want a high core count, enormous RAM, but low IPC. However, if you actually have an actual case for it, hell, go for it. I would suggest you at least go for dual socket X79 and just max out the RAM by using the 32 gigs DIMMs. Okay, that's the end of the video. Thank you for your attention.